Thank you guys. As Kelly said, we're so excited that you're here. Thank you for joining us. This is our first event that we're launching as Preservation Society of Nashville, which is really exciting for us. And we are so thrilled to just get going here in town. So Kel, I'll let you kick it off with the.
Okay, great. So just to sort of set the scene a little bit, I'm going to do an intro here for Robin in just a moment, but she's going to begin her presentation. She'll do some screen sharing, and she's got some incredible info and context to share with us. While that's happening, if you have specific questions or more general questions that pop up, use the Q&A. So there is a chat. We're going to try and not use the chat, but use the Q&A option on your screen, and you can pose a question. And then Melissa Baldock, who's here also from Robin's team, will be able to hop in. Let's say you've got really specific questions or more general. She's going to kind of hop in and answer those more specific questions. And then we'll leave some of the bigger stuff for Robin at the end. We'll wrap with some Q&A. But I'm Kelly Bannon. Colson Horton and I co-founded the Preservation Society of Nashville and launched in December. And it's been truly a labor of love. We appreciate your growing with us and alongside us as we are new to the nonprofit world and relatively new to the preservation world as well. So we're so grateful for the opportunity to learn from someone like Robin. And I'm going to read just a little bit about Robin's background because it's really, really impressive. Robin Zeigler serves as the Historic Zoning Administrator for the Nashville-Davidson County Metropolitan Historic Zoning Commission. Previously, she's served as the Senior Historic Preservation Planner for the Planning Division of the Salt Lake City Corporation and the Preservation Planner with the City County Planning Commission of Warren County, Kentucky. Her experience includes policy development, procedural improvements, commission support, legislation drafting, design guideline creation, and architectural resource surveys. She created and presented a certified preservation course for realtors in Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, New York, and West Virginia. And she is a trainer for the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions and a former board member of the organization. She's a graduate of MTSU and its public history program, where she worked for the Center for Historic Preservation, and she holds a mini MBA from Belmont University. And just as a further sort of to extend an invite to something that's happening in Robin's world and ours as well, the Metro Historical Commission's 47th Annual Preservation Awards is actually this Thursday, and the Preservation Society is one of the sponsors of that reception. So we're going to share more details about that on our Instagram, but that is open to the public, and it's a really special event to honor people that are doing beautiful and powerful work in the preservation world. So that's this Thursday, May 18th, and it's actually at I think it's in the auditorium of the Nashville Public Library. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Robin. We're going to turn our cameras off too, so that we're not distracting from her presentation, but hop in that Q&A feature and serve up some questions for Robin. And we're also going to, obviously we're recording this, just want to make sure everybody's aware that this is being recorded, but we'll share this content at a later date too. So take those furious notes, but know also that we will have this as a resource that you can go back to as well. Robin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Colson. And thank you, Melissa Baldock on my staff, for being here to answer questions. And I'm really honored to be your first event, your first party. So thank you so much. As Kelly told you, I am a Nashville native. Now, I lived part of my life in Brentwood and Franklin, but I still counted as a Nashville native because we came to Nashville for everything. So we came for school and for shopping and the grocery store. So I'm still a Nashville native. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about myself. My parents were very involved in preservation. They would buy a house, historic house, fix it up. We'd live in it for 2 or 3 years, and then we'd move on to the next project. This actually is my first fixer-upper. This is the before picture, and I couldn't find an after picture, and I think it's because I never really finished it. I was always making or doing something with it. But even as a little kid, you can see that the bathroom is on the 3rd story in the attic, and you had to go through one of the bedrooms to get to it. So even as a kid, I'm like, oh, this is going to kill resale value. One thing I got to do when I was young was go to visit Carton, the McGavick house, way back when it was first, right after. I mean, there was still hay on the floor because the farmer before that had stored hay in the house. But there was a crafts person there, and he was showing me around, and I got to see the ballroom on the 3rd level. And he showed me how the wood grain of the door was really a paint technique, and how these stains in the floors were blood from the Civil War. And I didn't have the words for it. I couldn't really express it, but I realized how important physical space is to telling our stories. Far more than just hearing about them or just reading about them. Being able to physically be there meant so much to me. And since most of you are members or thinking about becoming members, I'm sure you all have those stories too. But that's just me personally. That's just us personally. The real question is, why would a city, as a municipality, get involved in preservation? Why not just leave preservation to individuals, to nonprofit organizations? And the reason is because it's an investment. It's a planning tool. It's a planning tool that is environmentally, economically, culturally, and socially sustainable. But you don't have to take my word for it. So I'm going to ask you to just bear with me a little bit here, because I'm going to just throw out some really basic facts and numbers from a variety of studies that have been done around the country, including our own economic impact study. And Melissa is behind the scenes with me, and she's going to throw up the link to that so you can get to that easily. One of his studies shows that, one of Donovan Ripkema's studies, he's the one who also did ours. One of his studies shows that comparing 1 million in new construction to the same in rehabilitation keeps $120,000 more dollars in the community. Preservation means more jobs. In Seattle, more age-diverse buildings have 36.8% more jobs per square foot than areas with larger, newer buildings. And here in Nashville, only 3% of the jobs in Nashville are located in historic districts, yet 11% of all job growth in the city has gone to historic districts. Nashville's historic districts saw 24% of all job growth in accommodation and food services, playing a key role in tourism industry. And I think we all know how important the tourism industry is to Nashville. Historic districts saw the number of jobs in management of companies and enterprises more than double. Jobs in the information sector increased by 135%. So it's clear entrepreneurs and tech startups, they're choosing historic districts in Nashville. And today, if we had to replace the older and historic homes occupied by households below the poverty level using the most cost-effective federal housing programs, it would cost American taxpayers $335 billion. Now that's an old study, so I'm sure that number is bound to be much larger now. The Travel Industry Association says that cultural tourists spend more money and they stay longer. Here in Nashville, the expenditures of heritage visitors is responsible for nearly 20,000 local jobs and $588 million in local earnings. And I'm sure I'm not surprising you when I tell you that Nashville's sites of art, culture, and social capital are disproportionately located in historic districts. Now, this image I totally stole. I stole this from Joe Minicozzi with Urban 3 LLC. I first heard his presentation on the math of smart growth when the planning department brought him here to Nashville to speak. And you can find it on YouTube. He's done it in several places, so you can find different versions. And I'm sure if you're just looking at the images, that you would think that it's the big box store that is bound to bring in more tax dollars. But he really encourages municipalities to look at tax income in a different way. Instead, what is the city receiving per square footage of land? He claims that historic properties like this one downtown in the middle, downtown Asheville, in his own home on the right in downtown Asheville, bring in more tax revenue per square footage than large box stores. And what about sales tax revenues? Our study here in Nashville shows that Broadway and Second Avenue overlays that together, they make up 0.01% of the land area in Nashville. However, also together, they account for 2.11% of the county's state sales tax and 2.36% of local sales tax. So obviously, these areas are some of the most economically productive in the city. Another stolen slide, this from Anthony Roberts with the GBX Group. They're based out of Ohio, but they're here in Nashville now, investing in Nashville. But he shared this in Columbia, South Carolina, at a recent realtor course that the Tennessee Historical Commission hosted. And he explained that they went in, and I can't remember, I think it was just 2 or 3 buildings that they used the federal and state historic tax incentives to rehab. But that encouraged others to do the same. They were kind of like the pioneers jumping in. And today, downtown Columbia is a Renaissance city. In terms of the environment, I mean, it only makes sense to reuse what we already have, right? It's far more environmental than new construction. It prevents sending demolition waste to the landfill, but it also preserves the embodied energy that went into constructing the building in the first place. Just another way to think about it, reusing a 5,000 square foot building conserves the amount of carbon equivalent to what 85 buildings burn in an entire year. In terms of real estate, historic districts have been proven to promote homeownership, which of course in turn stabilizes neighborhoods. Buyers have more choices, and they can get more house per dollar in historic districts. Over the last 15 years here in Nashville, property values in both historic preservation districts and neighborhood conservation districts have outperformed the rest of the city. And I'm sure that's not too surprising either. But what I think is really important is that between 2007 and 2018, during a downturn in the economy where everyone was losing value to a certain extent, historic districts experienced half the foreclosure rate that we saw elsewhere in Nashville. It's also socially sustainable. Nashville's historic districts are really accessible. They have more intersections per square mile, it makes them more walkable. They have greater access to public transit and to parks. Nashville's historic districts are diverse in terms of household income and race. Our economic study found that in nearly every historic neighborhood in Nashville, there are households with very modest earnings living next to households of significant income. Often historic districts are accused of being home to only wealthy folks. And that may be true in some places. The historic districts in Nashville are home to households at both the bottom and the top of the economic rungs. In fact, there's almost an even distribution of households in historic districts among the lower, middle, and upper income households. Keeping old buildings gives small businesses an opportunity to thrive. You may remember this building in Hillsborough Village. It's gone now. And the replacement building is lovely and really it fits in well. But there's really no way a new building can provide for the lower rents an old building can. And to kind of back that up, a study by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, it shows that a mix of older, smaller buildings of diverse age support higher levels of economic and social activity than those areas that are just fully dominated by newer, larger buildings. So in short, older, small buildings provide a space for strong local economy. So again, preservation is an economic, an environmental, a social, and culturally sustainable way to guide and plan for our future. That's the why. Now let's go to one of the hows, historic zoning. And I say one of the hows because there isn't just one way to approach successful preservation in a community. Now, I know many of you are familiar with the National Register of Historic Places. And this is the Belmont Mansion. You may recognize that. It's on Belmont University's campus. It's listed in the National Register. That is honorary. It does almost nothing to protect the building. So if you can imagine in some crazy alternative universe where Belmont University wanted to tear this down, sure it would never happen, but let's just, for the sake of argument, they go down and they get a building permit to tear it down. They don't have to ask anyone. They don't have to go through any extra process. They can just do that. Now, this is the Ryman Auditorium. also listed in the National Register. But they can't just tear it down. So what's the difference between these two? It's because the Ryman is also in a local historic overlay. So that's why you may have heard that phrase, all preservation is local, is because the only real protection for physical spaces are these local districts with some type of design review process. Here in Nashville, we have a tool called an overlay. It's used in a lot of other municipalities, and usually it's a part of zoning. For us, it's a part of zoning. And if you want to imagine a layered cake, because I'm never going to pass up a cake analogy. I love the opportunity to talk about cake. All right, so the bottom layer of the cake is how the property can be used. So, whether it can be a store or a residence, for instance, that's the bottom of the cake. That's not going away. Over the top of that, there's another overlay, another layer, an overlay. And there are different types of overlays in the zoning code. Historic is just one of them. And we have 6 different types of historic overlays. Now, I have these in 2 different colors because the first 4 are typically one building or one campus of related buildings, while the bottom 2 are districts. And all of these differ in terms of what type of property is protected, and most importantly, what actions are reviewed. So for the districts, the key difference between those 2 types of districts, historic preservation and neighborhood conservation, is that in historic preservation, we're reviewing any kind of exterior change. And in the neighborhood conservation, we're really just looking at new construction and demolition. Now, you may have wondered why certain properties that have now been lost were not protected. I know I hear from my mother still. How could you let this building go? Why didn't you landmark it? It's because a new overlay, it is a type of rezoning, so there is a public process. The overlay is not going to pass without an owner being in support of it, where there's a single property, one owner, or in the case of a district, the majority of owners. So we don't go out and actively place overlays on properties, but instead, people come to us and we help owners with the process of obtaining overlays for themselves. Now that maybe begs the next question. Why would a property owner willingly take on an extra review process? Well, here's an example. The house to the right used to be similar to the house on the left. Now, you may like the additions they did. You may hate them. Doesn't really matter. What's important here is that the historic character of that house is gone. And the overall character of the neighborhood is now compromised. The reality is that especially in more urban environments where buildings are close to each other, what someone does with their property can absolutely affect the property value next door. And that's the concept behind giving communities the right to regulate property, whether it's as simple as how tall their grass can be or preservation. As a property owner, for many of us, buying property, buying our homes is going to be the biggest investment we make. And you want to be sure that someone can't do something next to you that is so different that it brings down your own property value. And that's the big reason people come to us and want the overlays. Okay, so now let's say there's some interest, some people call us, they're interested in an overlay. It just begins with a discussion. And then if the council member is supportive and there's interest in neighbors, then we'll begin that process of an architectural resource survey. That's where we do research on the neighborhood, we document it, photograph it. And that helps us to determine, one, if the area even qualifies. And then assuming it does, it helps us determine boundaries for the overlay and create design guidelines that are specific to it. Next comes at least one community meeting. And we will host as many community meetings as the neighborhood wants or the council member wants. And then if there seems to be, pretty good support, then the council member will file the bill. And that will begin the formal process of a series of public hearings. There'll be one with Metro Historic Zoning to confirm that it qualifies. They'll make a recommendation to council. The planning commission will make sure that it meets the local plan. Then they'll make a recommendation to council. And then council will have 3 readings, with the second being the public hearing. And so Metro Council is the final decision maker. So a frequent question that comes out of that is, well, how many property owners have to agree to it? In fact, legislation doesn't require any public support. But of course, a council member isn't going to take a bill through the process if there isn't any support, just be a waste of time. So how they want to measure that is completely up to them. That's a process they determine. So let's say now we've got an overlay and you want to make a change to your house. What's the process? Our historic zoning staff, one of our main jobs is to assist applicants through this process. So we'll review rough drawings, we'll give advice on meeting the guidelines. We also support the Historic Zoning Commission, but that main role is really helping people with their applications. We provide advice to them on meeting those guidelines. They can listen to us or not. It's completely up to them. They can take whatever they wish to the commission. Now, most projects, about 70%, do meet the design guidelines and the commission's pre-approved list. And so we can just issue immediate permits. Other applications go to the Historic Zoning Commission for review. The Zoning Commission meets the 3rd Wednesday of each month at 2 p.m. Those meetings are public, which means anyone can come and they can speak to the commission about any project on the agenda, or they can send their written comments in advance. Now, the commission uses design guidelines for decision making. And this is a little different than a lot of people are used to, because we're used to like the zoning code, which is very specific, hard and fast rules. And if there's any kind of exception, it's got to go to the zoning appeals board. But the guidelines allow the commission to take every case on a case-by-case basis. So it's really doing 2 things. It's allowing them to make fair decisions. They're fairly consistent, but it's also allowing them to address the realities of the site. If the lot has an unusual shape and it can't do things that the guidelines call for instance, then they can make those decisions very easily based on each individual application. And just a few statistics about historic zoning. We respond to approximately 1,500 inquiries a year. Now that's not applications. That is just general questions people have about all kinds of things, historic zoning and otherwise, regarding the process and otherwise, just a host of general questions. We issue about 700 permits a year, and we make about 1,900 inspections a year. And you may be thinking, well, shouldn't those 2 numbers be the same? And the reason they're not is because with new construction, there's multiple inspections for one project. We do these multiple inspections throughout so that we can catch any violations before something's just completely finished. In addition to historic overlays, a few other tools we have is some control over demolition of pre-1865 residential buildings and a 90-day hold on demolition for properties outside of historic overlay. So all the historic zoning we've been talking about, there is control over demolition. But we do have, the code gives us a few other tools, not to control demolition really, but to at least be aware of what's happening. So in the case of pre-1865, demolition is reviewed by the Historic Zoning Commission that then makes a recommendation to council. Now, council can actually deny demolition, but if they do, the city has to purchase the building. So that's never happened, hasn't happened yet. So that process doesn't really prevent demo, but it could work towards slowing down a demo permit, providing opportunities for discussion. But again, it's unlikely to actually prevent demo. In the case of a 90-day hold, it's kind of the same thing. There we go. Again, an overlays demo can actually be prevented. I can only think of one case where the 90-day hold actually prevented demolition. But at least, again, it gives us time to document the building, to talk to the owner about salvage, and if they're open to it, talk about incentives for rehab. So those are 2 tools that are legislated. But we as a community, our department, council members, neighbors, citizens, all of you, we also have this opportunity to negotiate, to give something to get something. And here's an example of what I mean. And this is an ongoing project right now. So that's kind of exciting to have current projects to give us an example. So the planning department has a tool called Neighborhood Landmark. Now I included these other two tools on this slide because all three of these terms use the same words. And so it gets really confusing. Don't worry, there'll be a test later. I'm just kidding. So a neighborhood landmark, again, is a planning tool. It's not a preservation tool. It can allow for a limited use that the base zoning doesn't allow for. There's several ways a property can qualify, and historic is just one of them. So not all neighborhood landmarks are historic. But when it makes sense to do so, and if the council member hasn't already done this themselves, we ask them to pair a request for a neighborhood landmark planning tool with a historic landmark, so that in exchange for gaining the use or whatever it is they're asking for, then the property is protected. And this is a current example. This is a historic grocery store. It's already protected in this case because it's in the Park and Elkins neighborhood. The building is in a residential neighborhood and it's zoned residentially. So obviously, I mean, you can see it doesn't lend itself to residential use, but I'm sure you can understand the neighborhood doesn't want some kind of inappropriate commercial intrusion in their neighborhood. And so the result has been that this building has been empty for years. So now the owner is asking for planning, they're asking for a neighborhood landmark to allow for a limited use, commercial use. So there isn't this danger of it being something that, you know, maybe creates a high traffic or late night noise. So that's the give. We've given this rezoning for a new use. And what's the get? In this particular case, the neighborhood will see this eyesore transformed into something beautiful, and the historic building is saved. And without this tool, quite frankly, the owner probably would ask for demo without some ability to be able to use this building in a reasonable way. We as a community can also use the public process for rezonings and subdivision as an opportunity to protect historic properties. The give, that might be additional height, a use that wouldn't otherwise be allowed, like we were just talking about, or maybe subdivision for development around the historic site. And then again, the get would be some sort of landmark, some type of historic overlay so that the building is protected. So all of these property owners sought historic landmarks as a path towards rezoning, subdivision, and additional height. Often the request for landmark, historic landmark does come from the council person. And that's why it's so important for organizations like yours to keep council members informed of the importance of historic places and to vote for leaders who understand the value of preservation in growing our city in a really thoughtful way. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about financial incentives because there are others who can cover this much better than I could. But the best resource for the 20% tax credit is the Tennessee Historical Commission. And Historic Nashville, Inc. is your resource to learn about their easement program. We have on the books, so to speak, a preservation grant program, but it's not funded. But I do want to take a minute to talk about the historic tax exemption for rehab, because this is brand new. We just have 2 applicants who are using it so far. And essentially an owner can, for 10 years, discount the post-rehab value of their property by all or a portion of their investment in the rehab, thereby lowering their property taxes for 10 years. So the property must be endangered, and at least in the moment, it's not available for properties that are zoned single or 2-family. So commercial, industrial, everything else, multifamily, just not single family or 2-family. Council has also set maximums for us in terms of how much value, I guess, can be discounted. So there's one pot available to bomb damaged buildings on 2nd Avenue, and they can just apply every month until it's all used up. And then we have another pot for everybody else that renews each year. And that deadline is July of each year. And we have Councilmember Syracuse to thank for this tool. Our department does so much more than historic zoning. So I really encourage you to visit our website for a host of information and resources. We're also planning a Citizens Academy for this fall, and I'm sure we'll reach out to Preservation Society to help us getting the word out as soon as that's all ready to promote. My hope is that although this was an overview of historic zoning, that it has revealed why a partnership between a municipality and a nonprofit is so important. Our work is mandated or enabled by state and local codes. The space in which we can move around is small, specifically defined. Whereas a nonprofit organization, you can take much broader strokes in ensuring preservation. So that partnership between us is critical. We can do so much more together than we ever could working independently. So if you were only to take away one thing from this talk, my hope is that it would be that preservation is a planning tool. It is an economically, environmentally, socially, and culturally sustainable tool that we can use to help Nashville grow grace. Kelly, I went so much faster than I expected, so I'm sure we have time for questions.
You were so speedy, Robin. That was incredible.
I'm sorry.
So there are y'all, please drop a question in the Q&A. And I mean, I have some for Robin as well, but there's one in here already that I think would be amazing for you to answer for the group, which essentially speaks to downzoning as an alternative if an overlay is just going to be a non-starter. And so the question essentially is using the example of Drawn Avenue, which downzoned from R20 to RS20. So I was just thinking, could you speak or discuss how downzoning in a neighborhood could serve as a preservation tool?
I think that's a great question because it reminds me to say that the only tool we have that's going to prevent demolition are the overlays. So we can do other things. We could downzone, we can do contextual overlays. There's lots of different things we can do to kind of relieve the pressure. But right now, if a property is zoned 2 family and 3 stories, people are going to demolish to build the biggest thing they can build on that lot. So the key is to prevent demolition, and that's what the overlay does.
What do you think are what are generally the biggest obstacles when a neighborhood or a handful of neighbors come to you or a council person and you start sort of doing some exploratory work? What are those biggest objections that neighbors have when they're considering an overlay?
I mean, nobody wants an extra review process, but we really do try to make it as easy for people as possible. Again, we have a terrific staff. We try to answer the calls right away. We get back to people right away. So we're trying to provide the best guidance we can on meeting those guidelines and to make that process as easy as possible. Our permit applications, the preservation permits, there's no extra fee for them either. So we're trying to make that easier for people. And then the main thing we probably hear is that, some people just don't want anyone telling them anything to do with their property. They don't even want to be told that they can't let their grass grow over a certain height. So that's probably the biggest thing here.
And I know you had a slide about property values, but I would like to hear you talk about that concern. I think as homeowners, we often think, well, yeah, I live in historic Richland, and so we do have a conservation overlay here. But I think sometimes there's this kind of pretend debate going on that's like, well, if I wanted to, raise my house and build something, it's that kind of blue sky, real estate dollar kind of fantasy that's happening. I mean, does that come up as an issue when y'all are discussing?
Somewhat. I mean, there's always 1 or 2 people that say that, but I really feel like by the time they come to us, someone comes to us and they want to do something, it's because something awful has happened. Whether it's the demolition of a great building or new construction that's just completely out of character. So they're usually ready. They don't mind the extra process. They don't mind the fact that, or at least they can see that this ability to max everything out isn't the end all be all in terms of the dollars, that there is a value to preservation. There is a value to protecting the historic character of their neighborhood. And that adds dollars. So it's not always simple as building the largest, biggest thing that you
We have a question from Lynn Maddox. Hi, Lynn. We're so glad you're here. I didn't
Hi,
realize
Lynn.
you'd be here. She's asking if there's a tool that you wish was in the toolbox or something else that Metro Council could pass that would be really helpful to you.
I think the hardest thing is that Tennessee just does not allow us to offer incentives. So a lot of communities, a lot of other states, they have both the 20% federal tax rehab credits and they have a state tax credit, which often can be used on residential properties. The 20% is for income producing and the state credits are often for any property, residential or otherwise. We obviously don't pay state tax credits, state taxes, so we don't have that credit, but we're also not enabled to offer other kinds of incentives beyond that tax exemption that council gave us. So that's a big frustration. When you're looking at a place like 2nd Avenue and the bomb that happened there, people want to keep what they have. They want to restore those buildings. But the amount of work that has to go into it sometimes is prohibitive. And they're really struggling. They are not getting as much from their insurance companies as they thought they would, as they should. And the amount of repair that's needed, having an incentive like that tax exemption, I think is going to make the difference for some of them. Some of the really big jobs that are left. Of course, a lot of people have already done what they needed to do, and the southern half is open for business. But some of those more damaged buildings, it's tough. And without an incentive, I think they'd definitely be coming to us for demo.
Great. That was a great question, Lynn, and great answer, Robin. Thank you for that. Would you, I mean, I don't want you to go out on a limb here or say anything that you're uncomfortable saying, but I would be curious if you think there are any neighborhoods that are potentially primed for or would be a great target to begin conversations around overlay. And if there is a way that we and our members could help support those efforts.
Yes, there's several. We're looking right now that's just been filed, Councilmember O'Connell filed for expansion of the downtown district. The downtown overlay is really only 2 buildings right now because there was always this plan to expand. And so now we're looking at expanding it to include parts of 3rd and 4th and a part of Union. So I think that all of council would love to hear from people as to whether or not that's important. You may not own property downtown. You may not live downtown, but I think we all recognize how important those buildings are to Nashville as a whole. So it's not just about property owners. It's about keeping that historic character of Nashville. And if you think about it, we were looking at this recently, the downtown core, which includes more than, just what we think of as downtown. It stretches out a little bit in both directions. The historic properties in that whole larger area, it's only 14% of that whole area. And our historic buildings, they're not a renewable resource. So we need to do what we can to save them now. I think another thing is a lot of the mid-century neighborhoods. We're just coming to a place where we're starting to recognize the importance of those. Metro Historic Zoning Commission is going to be honoring Haynes Heights neighborhood with their very first Neighborhood Leadership Award. Something we do to celebrate Preservation Month, and it'll be at the commission meeting. But Haynes Heights was the very first African-American neighborhood and mid-century neighborhood to ask for an overlay. And what I think is incredibly impressive is that they got it all done during COVID. I mean, normally, again, we have these community meetings. I think they had one meeting that was live before COVID hit, and then they kept working and they kept doing all the hard work. Staff doesn't do it for overlays. We're not doing the hard work. It's the neighborhoods. They're going out, going door to door, talking to their neighbors, making sure they have the information that they need in order to get those overlays. And they were the first one to accomplish it and do it over COVID. Very impressive.
That's so exciting. Just for the group here, if someone is in, maybe they're in a neighborhood where an extension would be possible. And I don't know if you like, that might be too nitty gritty to get into right now, but I guess I'm thinking, if someone has an interest in starting the conversation around an overlay, what is step one?
I would say, talk to some of your neighbors, get a little coalition of people who are interested, and then go to your council person. Make sure that they're supportive. Because again, this has got to go through council. So if your council member is not supportive, maybe you want to wait for another election, but because it's probably not going to go anywhere. And then once those two pieces are in place, then you can start spreading out and going to other neighbors and kind of getting their thoughts and ideas and starting those community meetings.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Colson, do you have any questions for Robin before we wrap up? Or anyone else? Do y'all have any final questions for Robin? You can drop them in that Q&A.
Thank you so much, Robin. I think you went over so much valuable information. It was just so appreciated for you to be able to be here tonight with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.